Welcome to a dialogue on accountability in the digital age. A dialogue with representatives of a global, multi-stakeholder community.
And I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm having a dialogue with Anders Halvorsen. Anders, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Fritz. How are you?
Thank you. Anders, allow me to introduce you to our audience. You have been with the WITSA for well over 20 years, started as a Director of Public Policy, Vice President Admin, and you're currently the Vice President of the Global Public Policy of the WITSA. So again, welcome to the program. Now, I see the WITSA logo in the background, but maybe you can briefly explain what is the WITSA?
Yeah, so WITSA is an umbrella organization of the national tech associations around the world. We're currently represented in 80 countries. We are ranging from the very most developed countries, the US, Canada, the UK, and so forth, to the less developed countries. We have representation in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in all of the continents around the world.
Wow, impressive organization. And you also organize the World Conference on Innovation Technology, which is by some perceived to be the Olympics of IT. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we've been hosting this for quite a few years. The very first one was back in 1978. We used to hold this every 2 years, and now we are every year. We have one coming up in October, from October 3rd to October 7th of this year in Yerevan, Armenia. And so we're looking forward to that.
Great. Now, the reason we invited you for this podcast is WITSA recently published a report, Building Trust and Delivering on the Promise of Artificial Intelligence,
Yeah.
which is a position paper on how to deal with AI and specifically policy. So that's going to be the main topic of our discussion today.
Right.
First of all, why did WITSA write that paper, and why did WITSA write that paper now?
Yeah, no, although AI has been around for a number of many years, the explosion of interest in AI with the generative AI and ChatGPT really made it pivotal for our organization to provide some guidance to legislators on AI, because the immediate reaction that we heard from our members around the world is that, what is this thing? This is dangerous. Everybody wants to regulate it. Everybody wants to do something on AI, but nobody knew what to do. So we thought that it was important to get together with our stakeholders in industry and try to figure out what is a sensible approach to dealing with AI from a policy perspective. So that's the background for developing this paper.
And can you give me some insight who were the authors of this report? Was that just pure WITSA, or were your members also involved in writing this report?
We have a committee, a policy action committee that is headed up by Doug Johnson over at the Consumer Technology Association in the US. And we had input from many of our members around the world. So this was a multi-stakeholder process that culminated in this paper.
Okay. Now, let's start with the conclusion and the recommendations.
Right.
And once we've covered that, there's a lot to pick up and talk about that. But what, in the opinion of the WITSA, are the main recommendations how to deal with policy around AI?
Absolutely. Yeah. So to give you a quick little summary here, that might be interesting. So the paper recommends a careful and common sense approach to addressing the risks that are arising from the rapid innovations in AI. The paper puts a spotlight on best practices, standards, and regulation. Best practices are essential, of course, for developers, deployers, and implementers, as they help to ensure that AI systems are fair, transparent, and accountable. The paper also emphasizes that innovation and trust in new technologies, including AI, is best supported when policy objectives and regulatory requirements make use of voluntary consensus-driven standards to support the implementation and compliance. And then in order to avoid the slowing of AI innovation and beneficial adoption, when regulation is warranted, they should adhere to a specific list of policy principles that we have identified in our paper. And I'll just go through some of these here, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so the first one is governments should avoid pro-human biases. They should not discriminate against AI, but permit AI systems that do what is legal for humans and prohibit what is illegal in the human realm. Businesses should therefore be allowed to use AI systems performing tasks traditionally fulfilled by people. Governments should focus on regulating the performance of AI systems broadly and avoid prescriptive rules that address specific processes and methods that businesses must comply with. Governments, businesses, and consumers are better positioned to compare the performance of different systems and to set minimum performance requirements when performance-based metrics are deployed. By enabling businesses to identify the best methods for complying with government-set performance metrics, it grants them the flexibility necessary to comply the most efficiently, thereby optimizing innovation, product output, and customer value. Moreover, policymakers should only regulate sectors, not technologies or models. Since policymakers cannot foresee all future applications of AI, calls have been increasing to regulate such systems and their underlying metrics rather than specific uses. However, AI systems may be general purpose technology that could be applied in many different applications. The risks and benefits of such systems depend entirely on how they are being used. Therefore, when or if a need for regulation is warranted, governments should differentiate between use cases and make narrow rules that for specific AI applications in distinct sectors such as education, transportation, healthcare, stock trading, and even when the underlying technology is similar. Policymakers should also be careful to avoid what we call AI myopia. So many of the perceived social harms from AI are concerns which transcend AI and have been manifest all through society for a very long time. The objective of policymakers should be to address and fix the broader problems, such not just those aspects involving AI. Focusing too narrowly on AI as the culprit of a perceived problem, such as in hiring practices, can divert attention away from the opportunities the AI can provide to mitigate those social harms. Governments should define AI precisely and narrowly to reduce the risk of setting policies that affect other software systems in unintended ways. In crafting any sort of AI regulation, policymakers must be clear on what aspects of AI they are referring to and in what context. So one pertinent example here is the EU AI Act, which in an early iteration a couple of years ago features broad enough definition of AI that even a simple spreadsheet, such as Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, likely would have been covered. Such unintended errors incur significant impediments and costs to those developers and employers of basic integration or automation products and services. Policymakers must also recognize and enforce existing rules capable of tackling harms that may arise from AI deployment before existing any new AI-specific legislation. Many laws and regulations around the world addressing important societal issues such as discrimination, worker safety, product liability already exist on a broader scale beyond the limitations of AI. In these cases, regulators are already equipped to tackle harms that may arise from AI deployment more often without the need for AI-specific legislation. Policymakers should therefore consult with businesses and other stakeholders about how these existing regulations should be applied to emerging AI products and services. Policymakers should also make sure that the benefits of a regulation outweigh the cost and harm to innovation, and to work with stakeholders to optimize regulations and to boost the uptake of trustworthy AI. They should consider the impact of regulatory intervention and compliance cost, indirect productivity, innovation, as well as on a competitiveness costs, such as impediments to the adoption of cost-effective emerging technologies that provide social and economic benefits. Moreover, governments must work with stakeholders to optimize regulations and boost the uptake of trustworthy AI. To create a competitive ecosystem for AI, stakeholders such as industry, civil society, academia, and government need to work together in shaping of the national, regional, and international rules and standards. Finding the most efficient ways to achieve the regulatory objectives is imperative, as as overly burdensome and unnecessary rules will reduce innovation, adoption, and force businesses to divert resources away from productive business activities towards compliance at the expense of the end user. Regulators should apply non-discrimination principles to ensure that rules are not impacting businesses differently based on their size and based on their location. Policymakers may be tempted to exempt smaller entities from new laws as a way to reduce compliance burdens and on such companies with fewer resources. But the better approach is to reduce the overall compliance burdens so that they become manageable for businesses regardless of size.
Anders, if I may stop you there, you've given us a great overview of what the policy paper discusses, which we can read in the policy paper itself. But you raised something interesting. You talked about policy recommendations for governments. But I was just wondering, what's WITSA's take when we deal with international situations when an AI technology is
Right.
built in one part of the world, but being used or abused in another part of the world. So, what is your recommendation how to organize policy in those situations?
Oh, absolutely. So, of course, the policy paper that we developed are really meant as a guidance that our members around the world, their tech associations, will use to work with their governments to hopefully uh, achieve legislation, regulation related to AI that is as uniform as possible so that you don't have unnecessary trade barriers. Industry is always benefiting from certainty, in a harmonized approach to trade and to policy. As the international umbrella organization of these tech associations, we are working with many stakeholders at the international level. We are doing a lot of good work with the OECD. Their best practices work is something that has been feeding a lot into the work that we've been doing. Also, of course, the G7 with their declarations, the upcoming meeting in Brazil with the G20. We're also working with, been involved with the global AI safety summits, of course, the Bletchley declarations, and now with the United Nations and the AI Advisory Committee and the work that they are doing, coming up with the UN General Assembly in the fall. So the primary objective is for us is to have as a uniform approach as possible to AI policy so that the marketplace is as open and accessible. We avoid trade barriers. At the same time, we respect the guardrails that are necessary to make sure that AI is deployed in as an ethical and inclusive and as a safe manner as possible.
Good, got it. Now, thank you for the answer. So, next to governments,
Yeah.
there's also these international institutions you just mentioned, who are your public for this report. Got that. Now, when going through the report, I was interested to read that you recommend an innovative approach to regulation, and that is making use of regulatory sandboxes.
Mhm.
Why that recommendation?
Yeah, we believe regulators should consider what we call a more innovative approach to regulation. These regulatory sandboxes for AI, we believe is an essential tool to regulate AI without compromising on innovation. And setting up regulatory sandboxes are often the best solution, we believe, for handling AI in the current situation. A regulatory sandbox, for those that are not familiar with it, is a controlled environment that allows for innovators and businesses to test and develop new AI technologies in an environment with reduced regulatory constraints. The idea behind the sandbox is to provide a safe space for businesses and regulators to work together to understand how new technologies can be developed and regulated in a responsible and ethical way. AI sandboxes promises several advantages, such as promoting innovation by allowing for the development of new AI technologies in a controlled environment to reduce the risk by allowing temporary exemptions from specific rules and inviting detailed feedback on their operations to regulators, which then informs new permanent rules that can take into account successful business models. This has proven to reduce the so-called time to market for innovators, giving new business increased legal certainty and thereby leading to more innovation. AI sandboxes can therefore be a critical bridge between AI policy and regulation and a large-scale development of AI solutions as they make it possible to test new technologies under the regulators' supervision and contribute to evidence-based policymaking.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering, does the regulatory sandbox also help with addressing what the paper calls the black box problem? And by the black box
Mm.
problem is not understanding what the algorithm does. And could you take us through what for issues the black box problem causes and
Yeah.
what solutions there?
Yeah, well, a lack of transparency in AI systems, particularly in deep learning models, can be complex and difficult to interpret. And it's an urgent issue, no question about it. The black box problem stems from the difficulty understanding how AI systems and machine learning models process data and generate predictions and decisions. These models often rely on intricate algorithms that are not easily understandable to humans, leading to a lack of accountability and trust. This opaqueness obscures the decision-making process and underlying logic of these technologies. When people can't comprehend how an AI system arrives at its conclusions, it can lead to distrust and resistance to adopting these technologies. So protecting consumers' privacy and ensuring responsible AI use requires transparency and consent. We believe that industry should follow guidelines for responsible generative AI, which includes respecting data provenance and only using customer data with consent. Allowing users to opt in, opt out, or have control over their data is critical for privacy. As the competition for innovation in generative AI intensifies, maintaining human control and autonomy over increasingly autonomous AI systems is more important than ever. Empowering users to make informed decisions about the use of AI-generated content and keeping a human in the loop can help maintain control. She just mentioned that back in October at the Congress in Malaysia that you attended, we announced a declaration. We call it Shaping the Future through Ethical, Inclusive, Sustainable, Innovative AI. And two of those principles, I think, relates to this question. And one is transparency. As a global industry, we pledge to provide clear and understandable explanations of AI processes and outcomes to end users. Transparent AI fosters trust and enables users to make informed decisions about their interactions with AI technologies. And accountability. We hold ourselves as a global industry accountable for the outcomes of AI systems in the event of unintended consequences or negative impacts. We commit to swiftly addressing issues, rectifying errors, and implementing corrective measures. Now, there are different ways to tackling this problem, depends on the goals and needs of stakeholders. I don't know how much time we have, but explainable AI. This is an approach that aims to make the systems more transparent and interpretable by providing explanations to their outputs, behaviors, and processes. Explainable AI techniques can include generating natural language summaries, visualizing the internal workings of the systems, or highlighting the most relevant features and inputs given the decision. Explainable AI can help users, developers, and regulators to trust, debug, and evaluate AI systems. Another important thing I think is open source models. This is an approach that involves sharing the code and data of AI systems publicly so that anyone who can inspect, reproduce, and verify the results. Open source models can foster also collaboration, innovation, and accountability in the AI community broadly, as well as to enable independent audits and reviews. That's not to say that there aren't the controversies around open source models, but that's a different thing. So anyways, I think hopefully that answers some of your questions.
It's a full answer to the question. Anders, I have two more topics I would like to discuss with you, given the time we have. Uh, First of all, statement in the report is treat firms equally. And basically, policy should not be applied to business differently based on size or location.
Mhm.
On one hand, I understand that um, statement, but how do you deal with the situation that the regulations differ
Mhm.
different parts of the world? So they're going to be treated unequally anyway because we have already different regulations. So how does that statement match?
Absolutely. So, in our paper, we state that AI policies it should not be applied to businesses, as you mentioned, differently based on the size and their location. We believe that policymakers may be attempted to exempt smaller entities from new laws as a way to reduce compliance burdens on such companies that have fewer resources, and as a way to more easily reach legislative consensus on new rules. But we believe that the solution instead should be to reduce the overall compliance burdens so that they become more manageable for businesses, regardless of size. If the objective of legislation is to protect consumers from AI-related products and services, then all businesses should comply with the new rules, regardless of their size, we believe. Likewise, ensuring consumers are appropriately protected from perceived harms, businesses should be held accountable, regardless of which countries they are domiciled. Now, treating firms equally in terms of AI policies may require harmonizing on reconciling these regulations or creating a common framework or standards that can apply across different jurisdiction and context. After all, we see the EU AI Act, we see the executive order in the US, we see different developments, China, Australia, elsewhere, and it is critical that the approach is as aligned as possible so that the
So
firms are
basically,
treated.
that's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Statement
So
of treat firms equally can only be achieved if the regulations are going to be aligned on an international level. Otherwise, we're still going to have the differences.
yes, and that is why we believe governments should encourage reliance on international consensus standards and to seek regulatory requirements with international approaches to AI regulation. And that's why these forums that we discussed earlier are so important.
Okay. A lot of content to be absorbed and discussed in the policy paper. It's actually quite a long paper. I've been able to
Mhm.
read that over the last couple of days. But there was one last question I wanted to discuss with you, and that is this paper introduces the concept of the tech panic cycle. I like that term. I immediately sense what it means.
Yeah.
Could you explain and take us through why which introduced this term in the paper?
Yeah.
Is it
We don't want to take credit for creating the term. It has been used, fairly widely around the different corners, and it's not even a new term. But yeah, the recent acceleration in the power and visibility of AI systems and the growing awareness of their abilities and effects have raised fears, of course, of the technology, and it's now advances so quickly that people are worried that it can't be safely controlled. So that's reasonable. But exaggerated and misleading concerns about AI's tools, their potential to cause harm, it has in many ways crowded out the more reasonable discussions about technology and what we're calling the familiar but unfortunate tech panic. So the fears around new technologies follow a predictable trajectory called fears to increase when something new comes on the market. They peak, then they decline over time as the public becomes more familiar with the technology and the benefits. Um, Other previous generative technologies, if I should use that term, in the creative sectors include printing press, the phonograph, the cinematograph, uh, uh, all had similar tech panics. Another example is the music sector. Innovations led to the fear that record albums would make live shows redundant, that radio shows would destroy the record industry, and that sampling and other means of digital editing would undermine the music artistry. There's a long list of tech panic cycles. It's easily to find on the web. But unlike today, policymakers were unlikely to do much to regulate and restrict these technologies in the days past. So we are confronting now a panic cycle over AI innovation, such as generative AI. Uh, it's kind of a new territory. It's the volatile stage that we are in now. You have policymakers having knee-jerk reactions, if I can use that term, um, and we are worried that the results may not be a sensible approach that would balance the making the innovation of technology and making them accessible to consumers in the way that we believe would be helpful to society. So, as the panic over new AI innovations reaches the fear cycle, we urge legislators to proceed cautiously with regard to any regulatory efforts so as not to harm innovation. Future of work is another example of this. The fear that machines will steal jobs is centuries old. But so far, technology has created new jobs to replace the ones that it's destroyed, from one epoch to the other, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution till today. Machines tend to be able to perform some tasks, not others, increasing demand for people who can do the jobs that the machines cannot. The degree of existential risk posed by AI is, of course, that's hotly debated, but they all involve a huge amount of guesswork, and it's a leap from today's technology. Even experts we have heard from over the past year sometimes tend to overstate the risks in their areas compared with other forecasters. So imposing heavy regulation, or indeed, as last year we recall, there was a call to pause new models. We believe that it's manifestly an overreaction. When regulation is warranted, it is for more earthly, more common sense reasons than saving humanity. As we explained earlier, existing AI systems, they raise real concerns about privacy, bias, intellectual property rights, and accountability, as we talked about. And as the technology continues to advance, other problems could still arise. Nevertheless, the key is to balance the promise of AI with a sound judgment of the actual risks and to be ready to adapt accordingly, we believe.
Great. Anders, I believe that's a great statement to end with. It's just another technology. We've seen it before. Don't panic. Educate yourself what it can do. That's what I'm hearing you say. And it's basically learning by doing. That's what I'm hearing you saying. That's Witz's advice.
Yes, absolutely. And I encourage anybody who wants to look at the paper. It's a lot of information, and I hope everybody will find it interesting. It's on the WITSA website, and
we'll make certain that we include the link in the when we send out this video, this recording.
yes,
Again, I want to thank you so much with sharing WITSA's perspective how to organize policy on AI. And I'd be very interested in, you could say, people's reaction on it. So we'll make certain we make the report available. Thank you so much.
thank you very much, Rich, always.